After 2 years of dating, I received a casual text from my girlfriend Nina at 11 p.m. saying I'm out with someone new tonight while I was working late at my custom furniture workshop. I was deep into sanding a cherry wood dining table when my phone buzzed with her message, followed by a laughing emoji like it was some kind of joke I should appreciate. The workshop smelled like walnut stain and machine oil, my hands covered in fine sawdust from hours of careful work, and I was mentally calculating how many more pieces I needed to finish before my Christmas deadline when those 13 words changed everything. I'd been putting in 12-hour days at my workshop in Portland's industrial district, a converted warehouse space I shared with 3 other craftsmen who understood the satisfaction of building something real with your hands. Nina had been increasingly resentful of my work schedule, making passive-aggressive comments about how I cared more about wood than her, how other boyfriends took their girlfriends out on Friday nights instead of staying in a dusty workshop until midnight. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was crafting something beautiful and lasting while she was out destroying what we'd built together over 8 months of shared mornings in our modest craftsman home just 15 minutes from downtown. I'd bought that house specifically because it had a detached garage I could convert into a workshop, and Nina had initially seemed charmed by dating someone who could build her custom shelves and refinish the antique dresser she'd inherited from her grandmother. But lately, she'd been complaining that my work was holding me back, that I should consider a more traditional career path that would give us the financial stability and social status she thought we deserved. Instead of calling or arguing like she probably expected, I simply replied in joy and immediately drove to the nearest hardware store that stayed open late, a place called Benson's that catered to contractors and weekend warriors who couldn't wait until morning to fix whatever was broken. I spent $43 on new deadbolts, quality quickset locks that would take more than a bobby pin to compromise, and another hour changing all the hardware on both the front and back doors of the house we'd shared since spring. I knew she'd taken her set of keys with her on whatever adventure she thought would make me jealous, probably assuming she could come home later and find me devastated and waiting for her explanation, ready to fight for our relationship regardless of how she'd disrespected it. But all I felt was this strange clarity about what needed to happen next, the same focused determination I experienced when measuring twice and cutting once on an expensive piece of lumber. The familiar rhythm of working with my hands calmed me as I installed the new hardware, each turn of the screwdriver feeling like I was securing something more important than just my front door. I then called my co-workers from the Furniture Collective, my neighbor Zoe who ran a freelance graphic design business and had always been genuinely friendly, and several other people I'd grown distant from since Nina had started monopolizing our weekends with her drama and constant demands for attention. Marcus from the workshop answered on the second ring despite the late hour, and when I explained the situation in a few calm sentences, he immediately understood and started making calls to gather people. I invited everyone over for an impromptu house party with the explicit instruction to bring whoever they wanted and let's celebrate new beginnings, not mentioning that my relationship had just imploded via text message while I was trying to earn a living creating something meaningful. By 1 a.m., my place was packed with about 30 people from my woodworking community, local artists who appreciated craftsmanship, and neighbors who'd always been polite but had kept their distance when Nina was around making snide remarks about property values. There was something deeply liberating about watching people genuinely enjoy themselves in my space without worrying about Nina's judgmental comments about my friends being too blue-collar or not sophisticated enough for her tastes. Marcus had brought his guitar, Zoe contributed homemade cookies that were infinitely better than anything Nina had ever attempted in our kitchen, and several neighbors revealed themselves to be genuinely interesting people once Nina wasn't around to make everything about her opinions. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't for months, filled with authentic laughter and real conversation instead of Nina's constant complaints about my work schedule and apparent lack of ambition. The party became legendary as more people kept arriving throughout the night, with my friends bringing guitars, homemade food, and stories about how they'd always thought Nina was manipulative but hadn't wanted to interfere in my relationship. I learned that Marcus and several others had been walking on eggshells around Nina for months, avoiding certain topics and toning down their natural enthusiasm because she had a way of making everyone feel like their interests were somehow beneath her sophisticated standards that no one had actually asked her to impose. Tom from the workshop brought his acoustic guitar and started an impromptu jam session in my living room, something that never would have happened when Nina was around because she considered amateur musicians an embarrassment when she had friends over for her carefully curated dinner parties where everything had to photograph well for her Instagram stories. The energy was infectious as people shared stories about projects they were working on, upcoming art shows, and plans for collaborative pieces that had been put on hold because I'd been so consumed with trying to make Nina happy and address her constant criticisms about my social circle being too lowbrow for her aspirations. My neighbor Zoe, who had been quietly nursing a crush on me for months, helped me box up Nina's belongings and stack them neatly in the garage while sharing horror stories about Nina's passive-aggressive comments to other neighbors about property maintenance and neighborhood aesthetics. I discovered that Nina had been telling people I was holding her back professionally, that she deserved someone more ambitious and financially successful, completely contradicting the supportive girlfriend persona she maintained in front of me while systematically undermining my confidence behind my back. Zoe revealed that Nina had once complained to her about my workshop being an eyesore that lowered property values, despite the fact that I kept it immaculate and had actually improved the garage conversion with professional ventilation and sound dampening that cost me $3,000. As we folded her clothes and packed her toiletries, Zoe shared that other neighbors had noticed Nina's habit of making cutting remarks about people's houses, cars, and lifestyle choices, always positioning herself as someone who deserved better than the middle-class neighborhood where she'd chosen to live rent-free. The conversation was eye-opening as I realized how many people had been protecting me from the full extent of Nina's toxic behavior, trying to preserve my happiness while watching her systematically tear down my self-worth. Meanwhile, 40 miles away at an upscale restaurant she'd specifically chosen to impress her date, Nina was having a miserable time with Brad, slowly realizing she had only texted me to make me jealous and prove her power over me, but her carefully planned evening of manipulation was backfiring spectacularly. Brad turned out to be one of those guys who talked exclusively about himself, his cryptocurrency investments that were probably fabricated, and his theories about which restaurants were worth the money based on their Instagram potential rather than actual food quality. She found herself comparing everything to the thoughtful discussions we used to have about craftsmanship, sustainability, and building things that would last beyond the next social media trend, realizing that Brad represented everything shallow and superficial that I had quietly protected her from. She started texting mutual friends around midnight, asking if I seemed upset or if anyone had heard from me, but they were all at my house posting Instagram stories that made it abundantly clear I was having the time of my life surrounded by people who actually appreciated me. The stark contrast between her evening of forced small talk with someone who saw her as a status symbol and my night of genuine connection with friends who valued authenticity over appearances began to dawn on her as she watched her phone screen fill with evidence that I wasn't devastated by her calculated cruelty. She could see videos of Marcus playing guitar, photos of people laughing in my kitchen, and shots of my living room full of neighbors having meaningful conversations. Everything she'd claimed was boring but was now recognizing as the foundation of a fulfilling life. By 2 a.m., she was making excuses to end her date early, claiming a sudden headache while actually feeling sick about the possibility that her power play had completely backfired and that I might be moving on without the dramatic confrontation she had envisioned. At 3 a.m., Nina showed up expecting to find me devastated and waiting for her return, but instead discovered a house full of people laughing and celebrating, with her key no longer working in any of the locks I'd changed hours earlier. She stood on the front porch fumbling with her keys for several minutes, trying the front door, then the back door, then the front door again, her confusion evident to everyone watching through my living room windows as the reality of the situation slowly dawned on her. I could see her face through the glass, cycling through emotions from confusion to anger to panic as she realized this wasn't the script she'd written in her head where I would be sitting alone in a dark house, miserable and desperate for her return. She started banging on the door demanding to grab some clothes and personal items, her voice rising with each knock as she became increasingly frustrated by the cheerful sounds of conversation and laughter coming from inside the house that was supposed to be her stage for a dramatic reconciliation scene. I calmly walked to the front window where everyone could see me and spoke to her through the glass, explaining that all her belongings were already boxed and organized in the garage, and she could collect them tomorrow with advance notice during reasonable hours like any other civilized person. The party guests had gathered around the windows like we were watching some kind of live-action drama unfold, with Zoe standing beside me offering moral support while Marcus quietly filmed the entire interaction on his phone for what he called documentary purposes. Nina's face went through several stages of disbelief as it became clear that I wasn't going to open the door, wasn't going to engage in the emotional confrontation she'd orchestrated, and wasn't going to provide her with the validation of my devastation that she'd expected as payment for her cruel text message. She started screaming about how I couldn't just throw her out of her own home, conveniently forgetting that she'd never paid rent or contributed to the mortgage, utilities, or any of the household expenses during the 8 months she'd been living there as my girlfriend. Her dramatic outburst about tenant rights and legal protections only made my friends laugh harder as they watched through the windows, with Tom quietly strumming his guitar and Marcus providing color commentary about the spectacle unfolding on my front lawn. The neighbors started coming out of their houses to see what the commotion was about, including Mrs. Patterson from next door, who had complained to me multiple times about Nina's loud phone conversations in the backyard and her habit of leaving trash bins in front of other people's driveways. Nina's meltdown intensified when she realized she had an audience of neighbors who were clearly taking my side in the dispute, with several people crossing their arms and watching her with expressions that suggested they'd been waiting for this moment for months. She threatened to call the police and demand they force me to let her back into the house, apparently not understanding that changing locks on your own property is perfectly legal when someone doesn't have legal tenancy rights. The party guests found her legal threats hilarious, especially since half of them worked in construction and understood property law better than she did, with Marcus loudly explaining to anyone who would listen that she had no legal standing to demand access to someone else's house just because she'd been sleeping there voluntarily. Her dramatic scene was only reinforcing everyone's opinion that I'd made exactly the right choice in ending things immediately rather than trying to work through her manipulative behavior, and several neighbors started filming her breakdown with their phones as evidence of her unstable conduct. She finally left when Mr. Johnson from across the street threatened to call the cops on her for disturbing the peace, screaming something about how I'd regret this decision and that she'd find someone who actually appreciated her worth within a week. The party guests erupted in cheers and applause as she stormed off down the street, with Marcus immediately pulling out his guitar to lead everyone in an improvised celebration song about dodging bullets and learning your self-worth. Over the following week, word spread through our mutual social circles about Nina's manipulative text and my legendary response, with most people taking my side and praising my immediate action rather than tolerating toxic behavior that had been affecting our entire friend group for months. I discovered that several couples had actually been avoiding social gatherings when they knew Nina would be there, tired of her constant complaints and judgmental comments about everyone's lifestyle choices, relationship decisions, and career paths that didn't meet her increasingly unrealistic standards. Marcus posted a carefully edited video of the party highlights on Instagram, strategically leaving out Nina's meltdown but showcasing the genuine joy and community spirit that filled my house once her negative energy was removed, and the response from our extended social network was overwhelmingly positive, with dozens of comments praising my handling of the situation. People started reaching out to tell me stories about their own experiences with Nina's passive-aggressive behavior, including how she'd criticized mutual friends' career choices, living situations, and relationship dynamics behind their backs while maintaining a sweet facade to their faces that had fooled almost no one. The consensus among our friend group was that I'd done everyone a favor by refusing to enable her manipulative tactics and showing that her behavior had real consequences rather than just accepting it as normal relationship drama that we all had to tolerate for the sake of keeping the peace. Nina tried desperately to control the narrative by claiming she was just being honest about exploring her options and that I'd overreacted to what she called a harmless comment about needing space to think about our future together, completely rewriting history to make herself the victim. Her friends initially tried to support her version of events, organizing coffee dates where they could hear her side of the story and offer emotional support, but they grew tired of her victim complex when they learned the full context of her deliberately cruel text message and my calm, measured response that exposed her manipulation for what it really was. I continued working on my custom furniture orders while spending evenings with Zoe, who had started helping me redesign some of the living spaces that still held memories of Nina's influence and preferences that had never really aligned with my own aesthetic sensibilities or personal comfort in my own home. Zoe brought a fresh perspective to everything from wall colors to furniture arrangements, suggesting changes that made the space feel more authentically mine rather than a compromise between two incompatible design philosophies, and I appreciated her straightforward communication style that never involved mind games or emotional manipulation designed to test my devotion. She understood my work schedule and actually found my craftsmanship fascinating rather than embarrassing, often stopping by the workshop to see progress on current projects and offering design insights from her graphic arts background that enhanced rather than criticized my creative process or questioned my professional choices. Her enthusiasm for my work was genuine and infectious, reminding me how much I'd missed having someone in my life who supported my passions instead of viewing them as obstacles to her own happiness and social aspirations that seemed to change weekly. Meanwhile, Nina had moved back in with her parents temporarily, a situation that was clearly humiliating for someone who had spent months bragging about her sophisticated lifestyle and independent adult status to anyone who would listen at parties and social gatherings. She discovered that Brad was only interested in a hookup and had no intention of pursuing anything serious, leaving her to face the consequences of destroying a stable relationship for a meaningless fling with someone who didn't even respect her enough to return her follow-up texts or acknowledge her existence beyond that single disappointing evening. Her parents were apparently asking pointed questions about why her relationship had ended so abruptly and why she'd come home in the middle of the night with all her belongings hastily packed in garbage bags, forcing her to confront the reality that her manipulation tactics had finally backfired spectacularly. The social isolation was particularly difficult for someone who had built her identity around being desired and pursued by multiple men, and she started posting increasingly desperate social media content about self-worth, learning from mistakes, and finding your true value that fooled no one who knew the real story behind her sudden single status. 3 months later, Zoe and I had developed a healthy relationship built on mutual respect and clear communication, with her graphic design business complementing my custom woodworking as we started collaborating on furniture pieces that combined function with artistic flair in ways that neither of us could have achieved alone. Our first joint project was a dining table with hand-carved legs that I crafted and an intricate inlay pattern that Zoe designed, creating something that perfectly balanced traditional woodworking techniques with contemporary aesthetic sensibilities that appealed to clients looking for unique statement pieces. The collaboration felt natural and effortless, with both of us contributing our expertise without the competitive undertones or hidden resentments that had characterized my relationship with Nina, who had always seemed to view my success as somehow diminishing her own worth or social standing. Zoe's design background helped me see my work from new perspectives, suggesting modifications and embellishments that elevated my pieces from skilled craftsmanship to genuine art, while my woodworking knowledge gave her ideas practical grounding that made her designs actually buildable rather than just beautiful concepts. We started getting commissions from local restaurants and boutique hotels who wanted custom furniture that told a story and reflected their brand identity, and our combined skill sets allowed us to take on more ambitious projects than either of us could have handled independently. Meanwhile, Nina had begun a desperate campaign to win me back, showing up at my workshop during business hours and sending mutual friends to advocate for giving her another chance to prove she'd changed and learned from her mistakes. She'd apparently convinced herself that our relationship had ended because of a simple misunderstanding rather than a deliberate act of cruelty designed to manipulate my emotions and prove her power over me, and she seemed genuinely bewildered that I wasn't interested in rehashing the past or giving her opportunities to explain her perspective. Her visits to the workshop were particularly awkward because she would arrive during collaborative sessions with Zoe, forcing her to witness firsthand the creative partnership and genuine affection that we developed while she'd been trying to rebuild her life after destroying ours. I could see the calculation in her eyes as she watched Zoe and me work together, probably trying to figure out whether our relationship was romantic or strictly professional and how she might insert herself back into my life despite the obvious chemistry and mutual respect that Zoe and I shared. But everyone who witnessed the house party incident refused to help her manipulate me further, with Marcus and Tom actively discouraging her attempts to recruit allies in her campaign to win me back. explaining that they'd seen enough of her behavior patterns to know that any reconciliation would just restart the cycle of manipulation and emotional abuse. She posted cryptic social media messages about learning from mistakes and missing what you had, but I had blocked her on all platforms months earlier and was focused on building display pieces for a local gallery show that would showcase the collaborative work Zoe and I had been developing. The gallery opportunity represented a significant step forward for both of our careers, with the potential to attract collectors and interior designers who appreciated handcrafted furniture that combined traditional techniques with contemporary design sensibilities, and I felt grateful to be building something meaningful with someone who actually valued my contributions. Zoe proved to be everything Nina wasn't, supporting my career goals instead of resenting them, genuinely interested in my thoughts and creative process instead of viewing my work as competition for her attention, and completely comfortable with direct, honest communication instead of games and power plays designed to test my devotion or prove her desirability. Our relationship developed organically without the manufactured drama and artificial crises that had characterized my time with Nina, who seemed to believe that conflict was necessary to keep relationships interesting and that jealousy was proof of genuine love rather than evidence of insecurity and manipulation. 6 months after the incident, my furniture pieces were featured in a prestigious Portland gallery exhibition, with Zoe's complementary graphic design work creating a cohesive artistic vision that attracted both local collectors and interior designers who appreciated our unique collaborative approach. The opening night was everything I'd dreamed about during those long hours in my workshop, with people genuinely excited about the craftsmanship and artistic vision behind each piece, asking intelligent questions about techniques and materials rather than just looking for something to photograph for social media. Several gallery visitors mentioned that our work reminded them why they valued handcrafted furniture over mass-produced alternatives, and we received 3 custom commissions before the evening was over, including one from a boutique hotel chain that wanted us to design furniture for their new Portland location. Zoe looked radiant in a vintage dress she'd found at a local consignment shop, her genuine enthusiasm for our shared success making her more beautiful than any expensive designer outfit could have achieved, and I felt proud to have her beside me as we celebrated this milestone in both our careers. I was discussing details of the hotel commission with a potential client when I noticed a commotion near the entrance, and my stomach dropped as I recognized Nina's voice cutting through the sophisticated murmur of gallery conversation with her unmistakable tone of manufactured drama. She'd crashed the opening with what appeared to be a rehearsed apology speech, but her dramatic plea for forgiveness in front of my professional contacts only embarrassed her and reinforced my decision to cut her out of my life completely. I watched her weave through the crowd toward where Zoe and I were standing with gallery patrons, her face flushed with what looked like desperation mixed with alcohol, clearly having worked up the courage for this public confrontation through liquid confidence rather than genuine courage. She began speaking loudly about how she'd made terrible mistakes and how I was the best thing that had ever happened to her, apparently oblivious to the fact that she was disrupting a professional event and making everyone around her uncomfortable with her personal drama. The gallery guests closest to us started edging away as Nina's voice rose in pitch and volume, her speech becoming increasingly slurred and incoherent as she realized that her grand gesture wasn't having the effect she'd anticipated on either me or the assembled crowd. I could see the gallery owner approaching with security, clearly concerned about maintaining the sophisticated atmosphere of his exhibition and protecting his other guests from what was rapidly becoming a scene that belonged in a reality TV show rather than an art opening. Zoe handled the situation with remarkable grace, simply taking my hand and suggesting we step outside for some fresh air while the gallery staff dealt with what was clearly a person having some kind of emotional crisis rather than a legitimate guest. As we walked toward the exit, I heard Nina call out behind us with something about how I was making a mistake and that she could offer me things that Zoe never could, but her words felt like echoes from a previous life that no longer held any power over my emotional state. The gallery guests who witnessed the incident whispered among themselves with expressions that ranged from embarrassment to secondhand humiliation, clearly recognizing this as the desperate behavior of someone who'd lost control rather than a romantic gesture worthy of admiration. Nina's friends who had accompanied her to the opening quickly surrounded her and ushered her toward the exit, their faces showing the kind of mortification that comes from watching someone you care about completely destroy their dignity in public. Several gallery patrons approached us outside to apologize for the disruption and to express their admiration for how professionally we'd handled what was obviously a difficult personal situation, with one collector specifically mentioning that our maturity and composure made him even more confident about commissioning work from us. The incident only served to highlight the contrast between the toxic drama that had characterized my relationship with Nina and the stable, supportive partnership I'd built with Zoe, who never needed to create chaos to feel important or prove her worth to anyone around her. 1 year after the infamous text message that changed everything, Zoe and I moved into a larger workshop space where we could expand our collaborative furniture design business, with orders coming in from high-end restaurants and boutique hotels impressed by our unique aesthetic that balanced traditional craftsmanship with contemporary design sensibilities. The new space was everything I dreamed of during those late nights in my cramped garage workshop, with proper lighting, professional ventilation, dedicated areas for different types of woodworking, and enough room for both my equipment and Zoe's design studio where she could create detailed drawings and digital mock-ups of our collaborative pieces. Our client list had grown to include several Portland restaurants that wanted custom dining furniture, a boutique hotel chain expanding throughout the Pacific Northwest, individual collectors who appreciated the story behind each handcrafted piece we created together, and even a few tech companies looking for unique conference room tables that reflected their innovative corporate culture. The business partnership had evolved naturally into a romantic relationship that felt effortless and genuine, built on mutual respect and shared creative vision rather than the power struggles and manufactured drama that had characterized my time with Nina, who had viewed every aspect of our relationship as a negotiation where someone had to win and someone had to lose. Working alongside Zoe every day taught me what a healthy partnership actually looked like, with both of us contributing our individual strengths without competition or resentment, supporting each other's personal and professional growth while building something meaningful together that neither of us could have achieved alone. Our morning routine involved coffee and planning our daily projects, with Zoe sketching design ideas while I reviewed the technical aspects of each piece, discussing challenges and solutions in a way that felt collaborative rather than combative. The contrast with my previous relationship was striking, as Nina had always seemed to view my professional success as something that diminished her own importance or social standing, while Zoe celebrated my achievements and found ways to enhance them through her own expertise. Meanwhile, Nina had moved to Seattle for what she described to mutual acquaintances as a fresh start after burning bridges with most of our mutual friend group, finally acknowledging that her manipulation tactics and victim complex had cost her nearly every meaningful relationship in her Portland social circle. According to updates I occasionally received through mutual friends, she had started therapy to address what her counselor apparently identified as patterns of sabotaging relationships when she felt insecure or bored with the stability that healthy partnerships provide. The therapeutic process seemed to be forcing her to confront the reality that her behavior toward me hadn't been an isolated incident of poor judgment during a stressful period, but part of a long-standing pattern of using emotional manipulation and manufactured crises to maintain control over romantic partners who had genuinely cared about her well-being and future happiness. Her therapist had apparently helped her understand that her need for constant drama and validation came from deep-seated insecurity about her own worth, leading her to test partners through increasingly destructive behavior to prove their devotion rather than building relationships based on mutual trust and respect. I occasionally received updates through mutual friends about her progress in therapy and her attempts to build healthier relationships in Seattle, though I felt no vindication or bitterness about her struggles, having learned that the healthiest response to manipulation is immediate boundary setting rather than engaging in drama or trying to change someone's fundamental character through patience and understanding. The few times her name came up in conversation, I found myself feeling genuinely indifferent, as if she were someone I'd known briefly in college rather than someone who had shared my home and daily life for nearly 2 years. Our house party had become something of a local legend among our friend group, referenced whenever someone needed encouragement to stand up for themselves in toxic relationships, with Marcus still sharing the story at social gatherings as an example of how to handle disrespect with dignity and immediate action rather than getting drawn into endless arguments and explanations. I kept a framed photo of that night on my workshop wall, not as a reminder of Nina's betrayal or as some kind of trophy, but as evidence that sometimes the best chapters of your life begin the exact moment you refuse to tolerate behavior that diminishes your worth and happiness. The photo showed Marcus playing guitar while neighbors and friends laughed around my living room, capturing a moment when I'd chosen community and self-respect over trying to fix someone who saw cruelty as an acceptable way to test devotion and prove their own desirability. Looking at that photo while working on custom pieces with Zoe reminded me daily that I'd made the right choice in changing those locks and refusing to engage with Nina's manufactured crisis, choosing instead to surround myself with people who valued authenticity and genuine connection over drama and power games that served no purpose except to feed someone's insecurity. The contrast between my life then and now was striking in every possible way, from walking on eggshells around someone who viewed my happiness as a personal threat to building a business and relationship with someone who celebrated my successes and supported my creative vision without feeling diminished by my achievements or questioning my commitment to our partnership. Our friends frequently commented on how natural and comfortable Zoe and I seemed together, noting that we functioned as a genuine team rather than two people competing for control or validation, and several couples had asked us for advice about maintaining both professional and romantic partnerships without losing their individual identities. The business had grown beyond our wildest expectations, with a waiting list of clients who appreciated our collaborative approach and the story behind each piece we created together, and we were already discussing plans for a larger workshop space and possibly hiring an apprentice who could learn traditional woodworking techniques while understanding contemporary design principles.